Welcome to Event Experience by Bizzabo, the podcast where we bring the best and brightest event experience leaders together to share stories, tips, and lessons learned from creating some of the world's biggest events. I'm Rachel Moore, your podcast host. The word content can have two meanings for event profs. It can be what your audience experiences from your event, and it can be how they feel or don't feel after experiencing it. Our guest is the Director of Event Content for Catalyst, Nazya Ayaz, and she's about to help us see content as an aspect of our events that creates both revenue and impact. With out-of-the-box content ideas and an honest look at what drives today's events, Nazya is about to launch us into new tactics for crafting our next event experience. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I am really pleased to give you a brief introduction about our guest today. Since 2004, she has been immersed in the world of event planning, and I do mean immersed, with roles at the Human Capital Institute, IQPC Worldwide, and S&P Global. Today, she is the Director of Event Content for Catalyst, a global nonprofit building workplaces that work for women, which I love because I happen to be a woman, so I'm automatically biased. I'm really happy to welcome Nazya Ayaz to the Event Experience podcast. Nazya, welcome to the microphones today.
Thank you, Rachel, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure is all mine so far, and our listeners as well. And I gave such a brief intro to you, and I really want to give you the opportunity, hand the mic over to you, as it were. Can you please tell us more about your role, about your world, your daily world, and kind of where you're coming from in your current role, and as our guest today?
Sure. Happy to. So I actually landed in the events world back in 2004, and this was in Singapore. So I graduated in 2002, right when SARS had hit Asia Pacific. So I was unemployed. I did journalism as my major. I did professional communications, and I was unemployed for about a year. And then in 2004, I got a job as a conference producer for IQPC, which was a global MNC, but a US-based organization. It was at IQPC that I learned a lot of the skills of the trade. How do you research the market? What questions do you ask someone that you cold call? And how do you build a program based on research? And as I moved along, of course, then I got posted to London in a more sort of a senior role with the same organization. And that's where I started to work on some of the larger events, which we call stage twos, and really took charge of not just content, but also revenue as well. How do we scale an event from stage one to stage two? Looking at sponsorship strategy, looking at sales strategy, marketing strategy, and whatnot. And then from there onwards, still with the parent company, which is Penton Learning Systems, I joined WBR, and they only did large scale events. I continued in that direction, pretty much did a little bit of freelancing for, like you mentioned earlier, Human Capital Institute, which is for talent management. I also did events for the finance industry, but majority of my experience has been with the energy markets. At S&P, I also led the programming and development for events for the energy and commodity markets there. And I've been very fortunate to actually work on a variety of models for a variety of regions, understanding the cultures that drive some of the strategy behind these events, and how do you actually use content, which is central to, in my view, the wider event strategy, and how do you use that to not just drive revenue, but create impact and also penetrate new markets as well. By the way, the views expressed today are my own and not of my employers. So I just want to mention that before we jump into the discussion.
I think that's perfect. And we welcome your views today because you segued that so nicely for me, because we're excited to talk to you today about content. I want to talk specifically program content for events, which is an aspect of experiential design that probably has our event prof listeners trying every hack possible to come up with content that drives revenue and delivers impact. All right, let's segue into some get to know you questions. I ask this of all of our guests, and maybe we're becoming the new go-to source for people before they go shoe shopping, but let me ask you this. What are your go-to on the ground event day shoes?
Hands down, my Roland Murray over the knee leather boots. They are like badass, they're comfortable, and they go with everything.
All right, I'm going to go Google this because that sounds amazing and badass to boot. So, which that was no pun intended. Sorry, I had to go there. Awesome. Thank you for that, Rec. What are you listening to, watching, or reading these days that you cannot put down?
The System Sunday newsletter by Ben Meir. Not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's like this internet personality, IG influencer, and talks about systems thinking, how you can have a better life or drive personal growth through systems thinking. So definitely check him out.
I'm totally going to, that just made me perk up anyway. I love systems and processes. And so I have a feeling that'll be my new love language. Great. I'm totally going to check that out. Is there a particular social post or a piece of media or even a hot take about events that you found interesting lately?
Yeah. So I think most of our listeners would be familiar with Julius Solaris. He's, the event influencer on LinkedIn and also on socials. And one thing he mentioned that has stuck in my mind is the event begins before the event. So before your program starts, really the audience experience starts from maybe when they land at the airport or when they check in at the reg desk. All of that, you have to look at it. And that has really stuck with me.
So true and accurate because, yes, he's mentioned quite often in that particular question. So excellent. Can you please share with us how you and your team create content that achieves both of those goals, the revenue and the impact?
When I look at content, I take it as essential to the wider event strategy, as I mentioned earlier. And I could be a bit biased in my view, but I really do think content is queen. Like without content, people are just coming together and mingling, which is fine too, but that's not what I do. I create experiences centered around content, and that delivers not just revenue, but also impact. So how do we do that? When we look at the strategy, you have to look at what the event goals are. Right? So having the end in mind first, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to inspire the audience? Are we trying to educate the audience? Are we trying to make the audience have a collaborative experience? Like, what is it, right? And once you have clear objectives in mind, you'll be able to shape the content for those objectives. So if it's inspirational, you want to have a keynote storyteller, for example, who's able to inspire the audience. They may not have the subject matter expertise of that specific industry, but that's not their job. Their job is to inspire the audience. So you're just being very clear about those kind of things. If it's educational, then of course you want subject matter experts to come and be able to share the insights and their strategies and tips. If it's collaborative, then the format really guides that, directs that in the sense, okay, is it going to be a workshop? So the audience members can actually do peer-to-peer learning, or can we have a moment in the general session, for example, where the audience is able to feed back to the stage, to the speakers. So that's what I mean by what exactly are you trying to achieve in terms of the goal at the end, and having that front of mind first. Once that is clear, of course, one other thing that you have to be very clear on is who is your audience, right? Who are you trying to create this product for? Because if you don't understand your audience, that's a recipe for disaster. So who are you creating the product for? Because they are the ones who are going to pay to attend. So understanding their pain points. What are their pain points? And this is where research comes in, speaking to the market, like really speaking to them, having relationships with them. Once you have your finger on the pulse, you'll know what sort of trends are happening in the market that's going to impact your audience. So really bring that and covering that in the content programming. One thing I like to look at is there are two things usually human psyche we're driven by. It's either greed or fear. Right? So I do B2B events. So really it's more like for companies attend the type of events I put together. So typically for companies, you either try to make more money or you're trying to survive. So it's greed or fear. So what are you actually injecting in your programming? Which emotion are you tapping into through your programming? So you got to look at that, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that are some of the key things that someone as a content person, you have to look at when it comes to shaping up content. Another thing I want to talk about is when we talk about audience, right? Now you can have an audience that could vary. So it could be cross industry, it could be your C-level, it could be your mid-level folks. They all would have very different needs.
Mm-hmm.
Your CEOs are not going to attend workshops.
Right.
Their needs are, I want to meet someone of my level that I otherwise wouldn't have opportunity for, like to meet, right?
Yeah.
So how can I create that for this person, this buyer persona? How can I create that? Oh, maybe a CEO think tank. A really high level topic usually bodes well for the C-suite. But when we talk about your middle manager folks, or even some of your junior folks, it has to be a bit more tactical, right? Because that's what's going to draw them. That's what they need for their day-to-day job. Yeah. This is why I mentioned like understanding your audience is super important.
Right.
One of the things that I've done in the past before, and this seems counterintuitive, is I have actually taken the hottest topic out of the main agenda. And people would be like, why would you do that? It's because I want to make money.
Yeah.
So now let me explain. I'm not saying don't cover it in the main agenda. It would be weird to not cover it at all, but have it at a very high level, right? Have it at a very high level. When it's super hot, usually a 20, 30-minute general session on it is not going to do it justice because people are hungry for more information.
Yeah.
You take that out of the main programming, you build it as a separate, you can call it whatever you want, a master class, or it could be a separate luncheon, whatever you want to call it, however you want to format it. Take it out of the main program, do it as a separate add-on, and charge people for it. Because if it's hot, they will pay to attend.
That's right.
Okay. But make sure that you deliver on your promise, that the content and the substance is there indeed.
Yeah.
Because you don't want people paying extra to attend that and then their expectations not being met. So I find most of the time people don't mind paying as long as they get the value out of it. So that is one sort of quick and dirty way to actually drive more revenue with the same content. You're just taking it out and doing a deeper dive on it separately. And then, of course, one way, especially recently, like post-pandemic, what I've been finding is people want interaction with people.
Yeah.
They want networking. They are hungry for that human touch. So how can we use content to create these multisensory experiences, right? What you can do is you can have like an art exhibition, for example, like if we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we want to talk about promote women and their skills and whatnot. Why not have an art exhibition that is led by independent women artists?
Yeah.
Right? And then share their stories. And then you can have like a listening, you know how they have in museum exhibits, you have the headphone and you listen. And then the narrator basically talks about that art, what that piece is about, right? Or you can have a independent designer trunk show where you're promoting these independent women designers. If it makes sense, of course it needs to make sense,
right,
either from a content standpoint or from an experience standpoint. These are just some of the ways there's so many ways to do it, right? But these are some of the ways that I can share from my experience. And one thing I want to just mention is revenue may not always create impact, but impact will always create revenue.
We'll be right back with more event experience after the break. Hey, event professionals, do you want to hear more from the industry's top event experience leaders? Don't miss out on future episodes of the Event Experience podcast by Bizzabo. Hit subscribe, drop us a review, and share this episode with your friends and colleagues. The Event Experience podcast by Bizzabo, where events come to life. We're back with Nazya Ayaz to discuss how a team can support content creation that drives impact and revenue.
A lot of the times, I think event teams want to be able to grow their market share, but find themselves like, okay, how do I go about doing this? I would say, again, what is the goal and objective for the launch? I always start with what is the objective?
Yeah.
Because we just need to be clear on what are we trying to achieve. So if we are trying to achieve more revenue, okay, or are we trying to achieve more impact, or are we trying to bring a customer journey further down in terms of like their buyer journey? What are we trying to achieve? So there are two ways that you can actually expand your market share. One is either you launch in a completely different market, so meaning region. So if I'm in, say, in North America and I want to launch the same event that I'm doing, which is doing exceptionally well, I'm going to do it in APAC, in Asia Pacific, right? So you can do that, right? The other way to do it is through being in the same region through seniority or function. So right now I'm tapping into, let's say I only do events for the C-level suite. Now I want to tap into the middle management, right? But it still is in the same region. There's so many ways to do this. Now, again, going back to your goal and objective, what are you trying to achieve? Who is your audience? And what problem are you trying to solve? So if the problem is, oh, we have a mature market here, but APAC is the new market. We know that's the problem, that we have a maturing market. We need to find new revenue streams or expand our market share there. If the problem is, oh, we're hearing from the industry that the middle managers is where a lot of companies are investing in terms of, I'm going to give an example, like for example, AI, right? What is the impact on certain jobs? Like, do we need upskilling and reskilling and all of that? Which level of workforce is this going to impact in terms of investment or even retrenchment? Who knows, right? So fear versus greed. When you look at that, then you're like, okay, I want to target the middle managers or the folks who are directly involved in this subject area where it's impacting them directly. And that's a market share that you're capturing. So those are the two ways. And once you figure out what problem you're trying to solve, you have your goal, your objective, you know the audience you're trying to build a product for, you do a SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis, I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's something that is super important for building a strategy on from the outset. And for the folks who may not be aware of it, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You want to have a very clear picture of what that is. So strength and weaknesses are internal, so to your team, and opportunities and threats are external. Once you figure that out, what you got to do is you got to research on some of these things, which I mentioned, pain points. But if it's a different region, culture is huge. It can make or break the event strategy. So culture is massive. For example, I did events in the Middle East, and there is a culture around how genders mix at an event. There's also a culture around, and this is, I'm talking about maybe like, I don't know, like 15 years ago, where they would just show up with wads of cash, like here, 20, 30 grand, they'll just pay on site. Like, how is that? Are your teams prepared for things like that? And I'm giving an example that may not be relevant today. This is from 15 years ago, right? Everything is more digital now, but I'm saying like small little things like that, you have to understand. Like in Asia, WhatsApp is like a major form of business communication, right? WhatsApp is actually a marketing tactic built into the marketing plan. In US, you would never think of WhatsApp as a marketing channel. So it's just things like that. And China has its own specific, I'm forgetting the name, but version of WhatsApp.
Is it WeChat?
WeChat, thank you.
But you're right. I've worked with people. That is what they live and die by, is WeChat.
Yeah, there you go. So it's like, how are you going to communicate with your audience? And culture is really important because that's going to inform you as the content person or the event strategy lead, the lens they're going to experience the event from. So that's one thing. And of course, there are other things like budget, like the budget is going to be very different from countries and to cities. And then finally, accessibility. How accessible is this market, number one, and also logistically and operationally? So if it's an on-site event, can your attendees get there? Or is it safe for women? Just things like that, I would say you should consider. And I know that ties in nicely to like barriers and challenges. So I touched a little bit about operational challenges, but there can be language barriers too. I have put events in Thailand and I had to do research with the folks over there and I can't speak Thai. So it's just things like that. Like, how do you work around those challenges? Do you need someone on site on the ground there as part of your team, at least temporarily, to make sure that issues don't arise and things run smoothly? So things like that you have to be mindful of. And finally, what I want to talk about is risks. So whenever you're launching into new markets, it is a risky venture, but it doesn't have to be venture. I mean, risks should be taken as long as they're calculated risks. So how do you minimize risks? One thing I would say is go out and get a sponsor, right? Before you launch something into a new market, make sure there's someone there to partner with you who has skin in the game, just as you do, who has vested interest, right? Make them a sponsor, give them the benefits or whatever that may look like, but bring them on board to minimize your financial risks. And usually when you have a sponsor, chances are for that new market or for that new topic, they would have insights because they have vested interest or they might have connections. So you can really, really leverage that relationship to build a product, to leverage the networks and connections so you know you're actually targeting the right audience and getting through to them. The other way to do it, maybe you can do it virtually. You want to test the ground. Okay, doing an on-site event is too risky. Let's do virtual. Dramatically is going to cut down your costs. So that is one option. And then I did talk about a little bit, this was with sponsors, but you can also do this with, you can partner with an industry organization who has a really good solid database, right? For example, I want to launch an oil and gas event and I would partner with the Society of Petroleum Engineers because I know that's anyone who is in the oil and gas industry is a member of that organization, right? So I would partner with them because you want to create a product that people know about. You can build the best product, but nobody knows about it. No one's going to attend.
Oh gosh, this is like a master class, by the way. Thank you for being so forthcoming with just really giving some solid guidance for our listeners and for me as well. But it's really educational and even explaining SWOT and things like that. But I mean, it's so helpful to be able to look at these. And this is certainly going to help our listeners tackle these things. And finally, the easiest question of all, where can our listeners find and follow you online?
The best way to find and follow me is on LinkedIn. My profile is my name, so Nazya Ayaz. And yeah, I look forward to connecting with a lot of you listeners out there on LinkedIn.
Nazya's Skill Up advice for our listeners is all about setting boundaries for everyone's benefit.
I would say practice your no's, but before you can practice your no's, so you can say yes to the things that matter, you have to be really clear about your vision and what you're trying to achieve. Because a lot of the times, you're gonna get opportunities come your way or asks and people coming your way, hey, do this, it's gonna be beneficial to the program. But then you really have to take a step back and look at it in a way that, is this the best approach for my vision, or should I keep the space for the right opportunity to come along? And I know I'm speaking sort of like in very abstract terms, but what I mean is if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. And that comes from experience. So I don't expect, you're being first year in the job to immediately know, like, yes, this doesn't align with my vision. I mean, it comes from experience, but really content creation is a mix of structure and art.
Thanks again to Nazya Ayaz for joining us on Event Experience. And thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to hear it. Connect with us on social and subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you're listening. Also, don't forget to share the show with your colleagues and friends. You can find transcripts of each episode and key takeaways on bizzabo.com/podcast. On behalf of the team, thank you. We'll gather again soon for a new episode of Event Experience.